The first time anyone truly saw her, she wanted to disappear. Her reflection in the glass storefront caught her eye for just a moment, and she quickly turned away. The jagged scars that ran along her cheeks and arms felt like the map of every terrible choice, every moment of misfortune, and every cruel whisper she had endured. She had learned long ago that the world didn't treat broken things gently, and she had long ago vowed never to let anyone see the aftermath of the fire that had taken everything from her. Her name was Emily, and at 17 she had already felt older than most could imagine. Her mother died in that fire, and her father had left long before. Life in foster care had been a cycle of rejection, fleeting care, and whispered judgment. Emily had learned to survive in silence, moving from one temporary home to another, never letting anyone get too close. The world, she believed, would never see past the burn marks. And so she hid behind long sleeves and scarves, behind low-hanging hair and the shadow of her own fear. On a particularly grey autumn afternoon, Emily walked along the crowded streets of Denver, clutching her backpack like a shield. The wind tugged at her scarf, and the chill seemed to seep into her very bones. People passed her by, faces indifferent, eyes that didn't linger long enough to matter. It had been years since anyone had looked at her and not flinched. As she passed a small park, she noticed a man struggling to gather fallen leaves, his young son nearby, trying to help but more interested in chasing a stray dog. There was a quiet grace in the way the father moved, patient, steady, and careful not to scold his son too harshly. Something in the scene tugged at Emily's heart, a faint longing she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She paused at the edge of the park, adjusting her scarf, hoping to remain invisible, and then a moment that would change everything happened. The father looked up from his task, his eyes, meeting hers, not with pity, not with horror, not with averted gaze, but with kindness. Emily froze. Kindness was a language she hadn't heard in a long time. She wanted to look away, to disappear behind her fear, but the warmth in his gaze held her there. It was a soft, unassuming warmth, but it carried a message louder than words ever could. You are safe. Before she could retreat, the man spoke. His voice was gentle, inviting, yet careful, as though he was speaking to someone who had been hurt too many times. He didn't flinch. He didn't judge. He didn't ask questions. He simply smiled. And for the first time in years, Emily felt a crack in her walls. If you believe in kindness and second chances, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this remind us all that compassion can change lives. Emily found herself walking past the park each day after that. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the simple desire to feel human again. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope she didn't dare name. She watched the man and his son from a distance, noticed how he treated everyone with quiet respect, how he laughed with his child, and how he never seemed to rush through life. Slowly, cautiously, she began to imagine that the world might hold spaces where she could breathe without judgment. One afternoon, as she lingered near the park's edge, the man, whose name she would later learn was Daniel, approached her. He spoke softly, careful not to startle. He didn't comment on her scars. He didn't ask about her past. He only said that the boy had left his favorite toy behind, and maybe Emily could help return it. Emily's fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. She could refuse. She could walk away and pretend the connection had never begun. But something about Daniel's presence made it harder to retreat. She nodded, and together they retrieved the toy. It was a small, ordinary moment, but for Emily it was monumental. It was the first time in years that she felt trusted, that she mattered enough to be invited into someone else's world, even in the smallest way. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became slightly longer, slightly warmer. Daniel never pressed, never pushed. He asked how she was, and when she hesitated, he shared little pieces of his own life, about his son, about the struggles of raising him alone after his wife had passed, about how difficult it could be to face each day. Emily began to feel a kinship with someone who understood loss, even if in a different way. One rainy evening, Daniel noticed Emily sitting alone under the park's pavilion, trying to shield herself from the downpour with a thin jacket. He approached with an umbrella and a gentle smile. Without a word, he offered her cover, and she accepted. It was a simple act, yet it pierced through layers of her guarded heart. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "Sometimes just being dry is enough." Emily blinked back tears. She wanted to tell him everything, to share the grief she had buried deep inside her, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, feeling for the first time in years that maybe someone could see her. Not just the burned girl, not just the survivor, but Emily. As autumn turned to winter, Emily found herself drawn more and more into their small circle of warmth. Daniel invited her to help with small tasks, decorating the apartment for the holidays, baking cookies, wrapping presents. She laughed quietly at first, afraid the sound of her own joy might betray her, but slowly, the laughter became freer, more genuine. One evening, Daniel's son, little Noah, tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Can you read to me?" he asked, his wide eyes full of trust. Emily hesitated, glancing at Daniel. He nodded gently, a quiet encouragement, and so she read. She stumbled over words at first, but Noah didn't mind. He listened intently, hanging on every word. Emily realized she hadn't felt needed in this way for a long time, and the warmth that filled her chest was almost overwhelming. It wasn't just the boy's innocence that moved her. It was the way Daniel looked at her during those moments, with unwavering patience, with genuine acceptance. No judgment, no fear, just kindness. And slowly, Emily began to see herself in a new light. Yet the scars were still there, reminders of pain that could not simply be erased. Some nights, when the apartment was quiet and the city outside buzzed with life, she would stare at her reflection in the mirror and feel the sting of old memories. She would touch the raised lines on her skin and whisper to herself, "Please don't look at me." But Daniel had already looked, and he hadn't turned away. One day, as winter gave way to early spring, Emily decided to confront her fear. She joined Daniel and Noah at a local fair, trying to blend into the crowd, still aware of the stares and whispers from strangers. Noah ran ahead, laughing, dragging Emily along. Daniel followed, keeping a watchful eye, smiling warmly at the world around him. Emily felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet oddly exhilarated. People would glance at her, yes, but she noticed something remarkable. She no longer felt the same urge to hide. She had found her shield not in invisibility, but in connection, in Daniel's quiet support, in Noah's trust, in the warmth of someone who saw her as whole, not broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Daniel turned to her and said nothing. He didn't have to. His hand brushed against hers, a silent affirmation that she was welcome here. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, not from pain, but from the sheer relief of being seen. And in that moment, Emily realized something she hadn't dared to hope for. Love could exist even after loss, even after tragedy. Compassion could reach into the deepest corners of despair. A second chance didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning to live despite it. Weeks turned into months. Emily grew stronger, more confident. She still bore the physical scars of her ordeal, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity. People in the neighborhood began to recognize her, no longer just the burned girl who walked past too quickly, but someone who smiled, who laughed, who carried kindness back into the world.